Barbara Smith drops by to talk about dismantling white supremacy. This is fascinating. Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. There's a fascinating piece published in the Nation recently titled How to Dismantle White Supremacy. It was by Barbara Smith. She's a feminist, activist, and organizer, founder of the Combahee, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, River Collective, and a contributor to the Nation magazine. She's also the co-author of the Black Feminist Combahee River Collective statement, and in 2005 she was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. SmithCaringCircle.com is her website, and The Barbara Smith is her Twitter handle, and sure enough, she is with us right now. Barbara, welcome to the program. Well, first of all, before we get to how to dismantle white supremacy, talk about exactly what it is and what the proportions are of this problem.
Well, hi, Tom. It's really nice to be with you. By white supremacy, I'm talking about that system that really overarches and overrides almost every aspect of life in the United States because of our origin story with the taking of the land of the indigenous people, which included, of course, removal of them from their environment and also genocide, and then with chattel enslavement. That's our origin story, and that has held on for more than 400 years, and we see that in the horrific events of this spring and summer. So it's a big system that affects almost every aspect.
Okay. And how do we dismantle this?
Well, my suggestion
Well, actually, before we get to that, if I could, Barbara,
surely.
what is the primary mythology of white supremacy? Obviously, supremacy implies that white people are in charge or should be in charge. But what would a white supremacist say? This is why I believe this.
I can certainly respond to that question, but that's really not the level on which I was thinking on, because often when people think about white supremacy, they think about people who are involved in organized hate groups that often use violence to enforce their beliefs. What I'm talking about is why a black farmer, when he applies for a loan in a state like Missouri or wherever in the Midwest, why he has to wait like 380 plus days for a loan, whereas a white farmer who applies for the same loan from the same institution only has to wait about 2 weeks or 30 days.
Okay, so how do we dismantle this institution?
Say that again.
How do we dismantle white supremacy?
Well, my suggestion is that we need something, because it's such a huge system. My suggestion is that we need something on the scale of the Marshall Plan, which, of course, was the initiative started by the United States following World War II to restore Europe in all different ways. Everything had been dismantled and destroyed by the war. Institutions, the economy, the infrastructure. So that's what the Marshall Plan was. It was humongous. It cost billions with a B. And I think that the system of white supremacy is equally big and would need that kind of attention.
How would that be different from reparations, or is this a description of reparations using, different phraseology?
This is definitely not solely a reparations plan. I mentioned looking at reparations as a part of the economic initiatives, the economic solutions that would need to be deployed in order to deal with the black-white wealth gap in this country. And it's not just a black-white wealth gap. Other people of color, Latinx people, indigenous people also suffer that wealth gap between what their families have and what white families have as wealth, not as income, but as wealth. So reparations would be a part of it, but reparations don't address lack of quality education in inner city communities. This is much bigger. Reparations don't necessarily address what's happening with the COVID-19 epidemic, with the rates of both catching the disease and dying from the disease being about twice as high among African Americans. So this is bigger than reparations.
So you're talking about major structural changes across the United States. I mean, the two principal reasons, if my reading of the literature is correct, and please correct me if I'm wrong, The two principal reasons why Black and Hispanic people and Native American people are more likely to get COVID and more likely to die from COVID have to do with, number one, that they're more likely to be frontline workers who can't work from home, like white collar, who are mostly white workers, can.
Yes.
And they tend to live in higher density housing because it's cheaper. And number two, because they're less likely to have experienced good nutrition throughout their lives. And so they're more, again, as a consequence of low income or living in food deserts. And the consequence of that is that they're more likely to have heart disease or diabetes or obesity, the major risk factors for death associated with COVID-19. I don't see how you respond to those things in a kind of reparations way. Here's a $100,000 check or a $5,000 check. It seems to me that what you're talking about here, like with the Marshall Plan, is large structural change that ultimately, at the end of the day, will benefit everybody, but brings
Yes.
up people of color. Do I have that right?
You're right about that. And you mentioned reparations again. Just to be clear and honest, this is not a reparations recommendation solely. That's an important discussion for the United States to have. But there's also the reality that people of color, including African Americans and other people who are of African heritage, that they have lack of access to quality health care and may very well be underinsured or not insured at all. So the factors that you mentioned around diet, yes, but there's also the stress of living in a nation that seems to very frequently kill us for driving while Black, sleeping while Black, being in our apartments while Black.
That's number three.
All stressors too.
Yeah, that's a great point. Which raises another question in my mind, Barbara. We know right now that African Americans who are in hospitals, who have insurance and they're getting treatment, with a white person sitting in the bed next to them in a two-person room, are less likely to get pain medication, for example. That's probably the most glaring example because of this mythology for 400 years that Black people are impervious to pain. Because we thought of them, America thought of them as beasts of burden, essentially, initially. I mean, that was the whole point of slavery, or one of them. But that's still going on, and that's going on independent of how well funded the hospital is, how well educated the doctors are. I mean, how do we get to this core stuff that's why I was asking, the theology or the ideology of white supremacy. We only have about a minute left, but how do we get to that stuff, Barbara?
Yeah, I think that's where, and that's not something that I wrote about very explicitly in the article that you are referring to. I wrote an earlier article, an op-ed for the Boston Globe that was published in June, where I talked about educational initiatives, having public health, public service announcements that would explain some things about what goes on in our nation and to get rid of those myths. You asked me about what do white supremacists believe. We could actually do educational initiatives to get rid of some of that, and that would include, of course, those doctors who have those really inaccurate beliefs about Black people's bodies.
Yeah, and I don't think that they're even conscious of their beliefs. I think, that's how insidious this is. What do you think? Yes,
and there's a study, you probably, I wanted to say thank you for having read that study, the same one or read about that study that I did, which did, a huge survey of, I think, new doctors, like early in their career. In other words, not people who lived through Jim Crow and have those kinds of experiences of segregation. And even they, the younger doctors beginning their careers, had those myths.
Wow. Barbara Smith, the website smithcaringcircle.com, her Twitter handle, The Barbara Smith, and her new article in the Nation magazine, How to Dismantle White Supremacy. Barbara, thanks for dropping by.